Sometimes life gets crazy and it's just too easy to focus on all the negativity in the world. Welcome to the audio antidote to that. On this show, we highlight the amazing and positive work being done in the world to remind ourselves that there is hope out there for the future. And along the way, we'll pick up some new perspectives and ideas so we can all work together to make the world a little bit better. Because we know that when creativity and community come together, we can create good. This is Creating Good with Matt Barnes. Let's do it. Good morning, afternoon, or evening.
Yeah, I don't know. What?
Depending on when you're listening to this.
Yeah.
Welcome to Creating Good with Matt Barnes.
And Tiffany Pope.
Well, no, you're not in the title, though.
Oh my gosh. Okay, fine.
Creating Good with Matt Barnes.
So what am I supposed to say?
And then you're just like, and I'm Tiffany Pope.
Oh.
Because it's the title.
Well, okay, I like to be added, okay? I like to feel included, okay?
I know.
Leave me alone.
I know, and I love to make you feel left out.
Yeah, whatever. So, somebody has a birthday coming up.
I do.
Yeah, are you excited? How old are you turning? 100?
Oh, wow.
Look, we bantered and you made fun of me all morning, okay? So this is the least I can do.
You've given me plenty of ammo. I'm turning 46.
Oh.
46.
46.
And I think I've said this before. So my wife, Stacy, is actually 8 months older than me, or 7 months older than me, I guess. But she looks
great.
How many years younger than me do you think she looks?
I would say probably 8.
Oh, wow. Okay. I've heard more. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
People
Man,
now I feel bad.
No, I mean, I'm great with that. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword because it's nice. Oh, yeah, she's like my young wife or whatever, I guess. But she's not. I mean, she's my wife, but she's actually older than me. But she's half Japanese. So she's got that Asian youthfulness thing going on.
Yes.
And so she looks perpetually like early 30s.
I was going to say, definitely in her 30s.
And people look at me and they're like, oh, you're like 52. And I'm like, I hate you. So I don't know.
I feel like it's the beard.
The beard's definitely, I still got summer beard. This will be gone by the time this comes out. This will be gone by next week. I got to trim this thing up. Yeah. But yeah, birthday.
Yeah, where are you going this weekend?
We're getting away to Palm Springs for the weekend.
Yay, a little getaway.
Stacy and I, which is great. We've had a chaotic summer.
Yes.
And so we're pretty much just going to sleep.
Awesome.
It's going to be like bed. It's just going to be like waking up at, I don't know. I don't know if I can sleep in anymore. We're going to find out.
Yeah. Keep us updated.
We'll report back on that one. Yeah. Inquiring minds want to know. All right. We've got a great episode today. Rhea Wong is our guest today, and she was delightful, so funny.
Ooh, delightful.
And entertaining and energizing. And she was just a great person to talk to. I was so glad to get to know her. She has over 20 years of experience in fundraising for nonprofits, which to me is like the worst part.
Yeah.
Right? Like
how could that be fun?
So if you're a fun, energetic person and you've chosen fundraising, I want to know why.
Yeah.
I want to know what's going on. So she actually wrote a book called Get That Money, Honey, the No BS Guide to Raising More Money for Your Nonprofit.
No way.
Yes.
That is so awesome.
She hosts a podcast called The Nonprofit Lowdown.
Wow.
And is just giving great insight into effective fundraising and nonprofit management. And she's got great strategies and mindset shifts that she's trying to bring to all of you out there who are trying to raise money and building long-lasting donor relationships. And if you're not a nonprofit, I think understanding the nonprofit side of this is important because these nonprofits are out there. They are the conduit for you to be able to change the world.
Yeah.
And they rely on us to make that happen. And in that way, we get to be invited into their stories and become a part of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And Rhea's got really cool just perspectives on all of that. So
I love that.
We will be back with Rhea Wong right after this message.
Bye.
See ya. Creating Good with Matt Barnes is brought to you by Rogue United. So here's the deal. You can either add to the world or you can take from it. And those are the choices. I don't make the rules. I started Rogue United and all the projects and companies under the Rogue United banner because I want to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm adding to the world. I'm contributing in some way, that I'm using what I have, my resources, my talents, experiences, whatever it is, to make the world just a little bit better, or maybe even a lot better. To put it simply, Rogue United is all about bringing creative problem solving through community in order to, wait for it, create good. Like the title of this podcast, Creating Good. In fact, that's really where Creating Good came from. So visit rogueunited.com today and see all the ways that you can go rogue. From Rogue Creatives to Rogue Collective, Rogue Aviation to Rogue Labs, and of course, Creating Good. The options are endless. Okay, not really endless. There's only so much we can do, but there's still a lot of options there. It's not like infinite, but there's a lot. Anyway, that's rogueunited.com for all the options in the Rogueverse. I just made that up. Rogue United. Go rogue or go home. All right, enough from me. Let's get back to me and our guest. All right, I'm here with Rhea Wong. Rhea, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks for the invite. So happy to be here.
Oh, man, it's always so exciting to hear from new people and hear what's going on. Before we jump into everything else, we always start with a segment we call 3 Random Questions, because I'm going to ask you 3 really random questions.
I love it.
And I will judge your answers, so answer carefully. If indeed there is alternate universes out there, what are you doing in an alternate universe?
So good. I am probably running a dive shop in Bali and living my best life on the beach.
Nice. I've never been to Bali. Have you been?
I have, and it's magical.
I've heard. All right. That's a good answer. I like that. You passed that one. All right. What is a comfort show for you, one that you could watch over and over again?
Such a good question. Actually, 2 things. Either Great British Baking Show, because they're so nice and British and it's so low stakes. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I've been rewatching Killing Eve because I apparently like to watch murder shows for fun. I find murder to be relaxing.
Yeah, of course. I loved Killing Eve. The first couple seasons especially.
Yeah. Once Phoebe Waller-Bridge stopped writing it, really jumped the shark. But the first 2 seasons, fantastic.
Yeah, the first 2 seasons were so great. I just hate it when a show has such great promise and then isn't able to land the plane, you know?
I know. Oh, you know what? I watched Shogun recently, and I was like, I don't know if you saw it on Hulu. It was fantastic. And like, it really kind of was able to land the plane. It was great. It was very satisfying. I like a satisfying end.
It's done?
Yeah. Well, they just announced that they're doing a 2nd season, which is a little baffling to me. But yeah, the season was incredible.
Interesting. Okay. I've heard good things about that one. I need to check it out. Ever since we became parents, it's hard to keep up on everything. It's by the time.
Well, you've got like 15 children, so I don't know that you have time.
Yeah, something like that. So by the time they all get to bed, we get like 1 half-hour show in and then we fall asleep. So we used to be up on everything and now it's so sad. We have a long list. But we love our kids, obviously, and they're well worth it, of course.
Like kids, you're getting into the TV watching time.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I'm really up on what's happening on Bluey. I'm really up on what's happening with the Wiggles. And Bluey is, I've got most of my team here, even that don't have kids, watching Bluey because it's just so good. I don't know if you've watched. It's so good.
You watch Peppa Pig?
I haven't watched Peppa Pig. My daughter was in a commercial recently, and it was a thing with Peppa Pig. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. I mean, now I'm aware of it, but I've never sseen it.
What's funny is my nieces are very into Bluey, and they're American, but they started saying mummy. I was like, what is happening right now? Why do your children have fake Australian accents?
But I always tell people it's like the Ted Lasso for kids. It's just such a great, like, happy, positive, and it's the best parenting resource, I think, out there.
Oh, I mean, Ted Lasso, he knows what's up.
Yeah. If a zombie apocalypse happens, what's your plan?
That is a really good question. To be honest, I think I'm pretty screwed. I may just like lay down and be like, all right, eat my brain. It's fine.
You're in Brooklyn. Are you up high? Are you down low?
I'm down low. I can't run that fast. I'm opposed to violence. Well, the only other thing I can think is I do have a friend who he lives down the block and he's a hunter. So maybe I might run to his house and be like, you have guns and bow and arrow type things. You seem manly and violent. Like, help me.
It's kind of like what I do when I run to my creative director when I see a cockroach. I'm like, hey, Corey, take care of that thing, that beast. I can't do it.
All right, wait. I know we're not talking about nonprofit things. I was just telling you, I got back from a trip to Morocco last night, and I was in the desert in like a glamping tent. And I swear to you, at 4:00 in the morning, I woke up and there was a cockroach on my face. It was the stuff of nightmares.
How loud was the scream?
It wasn't that loud of a scream because I didn't realize it until I like till it got off my face. And then I delegated the husband to kill it. I was like, I cannot. Like, this is the only other worst thing would have been any kind of rodentia, because I don't do rodentia.
Rodentia is an excellent word. You don't hear that one often.
No, rodentia is like, I don't do rodentia. There's been like this weird thing. I don't know. Instagram has like served a bunch of like capybara videos on my feed. I don't know why, but I'm like, why does Instagram think I want to see these giant rodents? I do not. And people love them. And they're like, let them sleep in the bed and like swim around. It is disgusting.
Have you scheduled an appointment with a therapist after the cockroach incident? Because I would need that.
No, but I did complain about it for a couple hours.
Well, I'm so excited to hear about you and what you do. Tell me about you, your origin story kind of, and where you came from and what you're doing.
I am a longtime nonprofit. I'd like to say I'm a recovering executive director. So a lot of us out here in the field, I never thought to myself, you know what I'm going to be when I grow up? A fundraiser. So I was a 26-year-old ED. I talk about this a lot. I did 2 Google searches my first day on the job. The first Google search was, what does an ED do? And the second Google search was, how do you fundraise? I was 26 years old, totally clueless. And I was at my organization for 12 years. Over the course of 12 years, I and a bunch of other folks who helped, my team and my board, grew the organization from $250K a year in private funds to just a little under $3 million a year. And I was like, that was great. Why did it take me 12 years to figure it out? So I've dedicated the next stage of my career to helping the 26-year-old me. So it's like crazy. Matt, I know you're in the nonprofit field, but how is it that we give people these enormous jobs? We ask them to change the world. And by the way, we're not actually going to train you in the thing that we're asking you to do. Go figure it out.
Right. And we're also going to put you into a system that is going to actually get in the way of you doing that pretty much at every step. You can't pay people well. You can't spend money on these things. But tell me if this was your experience. I find that nonprofits are so often started by people who are so passionate about a thing, they don't know what they're getting themselves into. They think, oh, I'm just going to start a nonprofit to solve that. And so they do that thing. And then it's like, but they're not trained to do any of the other stuff, the fundraising, the leading an organization, how to train people, how to set up systems. And then also they've been conditioned, as we all have, to think that nonprofit means poor. Like, do it without money. Do it without resources, solve the world's problems on a shoestring budget. And if you can eat too, that's maybe okay. It's all set up against you, you know?
Yeah. Well, I often think of people who start nonprofits, much like I think people who have kids. I don't have kids. I know you have like 25.
It grows every time you mention it.
Yeah, it does grow. You're a prolific man. But part of it is that you have to not know how hard it is. Otherwise, no one would do it, right? You kind of have to go in with a sense of like, okay, I'm going to figure it out. But you're right in that I think, especially when I want to talk about boards for a second, the thing that drives me crazy is the fact that we put folks on our board who often are not from the nonprofit field, who are from corporate or whatever, and we ask them about how to run a nonprofit. Like, so they have no idea, but they have lots of opinions. And they're also averse to doing things that would otherwise make sense in their for-profit world. So like professional development, if you want people to do a thing, you should probably invest in teaching them how to do things. No, we can't afford that. Okay, so what do you want to do? You're saying you want more funds in the door. You're saying you're unwilling to invest in the capacity and the skill set of your leader. So what's going to change? It drives me insane.
Yeah, it's so hard because the deck is stacked against you. My for-profit side of things, we are a creative agency and we work mainly with nonprofits. So we're doing creative work, we're doing the storytelling, and that's considered overhead. And I'm like, how is that overhead? That is central to the job, is bringing awareness so that people can give, so that they can be a part of it, and so that you can do the work. And yet it's like, oh, but you can't really spend money on that because that's overhead, that's unnecessary. And you're like, wait. But that's how we all have been conditioned to think. And I had somebody on last week that was saying, she said, we're the only industry that's defined by what we're not.
Oh my gosh, I know. The very word is nonprofit. It drives me crazy.
And what does that put into people's head?
I know. I've been trying to use the word social impact, not nonprofit. But this goes to something that just, again, this is the bee in my bonnet, which is the scarcity mindset that is so pervasive in the industry. It starts from the word nonprofit. We're defined by the negative, what we're not what we are. We're social change, we're social impact, we're changing the world. And I think that scarcity mindset really is hobbling us, and it goes into everything that we do, particularly with fundraising. So how many times as fundraisers do they start with, well, how much can we raise this year versus what do we need in order to move the needle on this intractable problem? What are the resources? And I think just coming from a different space and asking different questions from the space of abundance is key. I think when you're coming from the scarcity mindset, you're already putting up these energetic blocks. It's like, I use dating analogies. It's like, if you're going into a new date, assuming that you're less than, assuming that you're coming from a place of inferiority, assuming that you're bringing the baggage from your last bad relationship, how successful do you think that that relationship is going to be? And I think gets a lot into, I get into brain science. So when our brains are in this scarcity mindset, our amygdalas are overreacting, that we get into fight, flight, or freeze. And when we're in our survival mindset, when we're perceiving the world as a threat, we also get very transactional with people. So how often do we think about people like walking checkbooks? Okay, we're going to like twist some arms. We're going to go beg. The way that we talk about it puts us at a disadvantage.
It absolutely does. And I had, well, two things. One, you brought up sort of the brain science of it. I was in the fight or flight. I was reading an article about 2 months ago. They're just beginning to understand so much about the vagus nerve and how much of that is regulating everything in our bodies. But basically going like this fight or flight reflex was meant to be activated in certain circumstances that were to save your life. And now we all walk around with it activated almost all the time because of the constant barrage of whether it's social media or just everything. Like life is so much more stressful, which is why we're seeing mental health problems and all this stuff. And we're seeing it more also because people are finally addressing them, but also with teens. And it's just crazy. You read all the stats and you put on top of that the pressure these people get into these nonprofits and they are trying to do something great, but there's all this pressure to, you got to do it this way or you can't do it that way and you got to figure it out. And it's almost paralyzing. There's not much you can do.
Well, and I think the way that we set it up, particularly with boards, I'm calling out boards now too, is the way that philanthropy comes from the great love of humans. As a philanthropist, I am going to give when I am ready to give. And when the fundraiser is being pressured to deliver the gift by the quarter or the gift by the end of fiscal year, you're not working in service of me as a donor. You're working with your own self-interest in mind because you're getting pressure from your C-suite, you're getting pressure from your board. So we're working out cross purposes. The reason we're burning fundraisers out is that we are making them put the needs of the organization ahead of the needs of the donor. And when I'm a donor, I'm going to give to your organization because I believe in what you do. I want something to happen in the world. And if you as a fundraiser are not helping me to see the possibility of what my gift can do and how I can make an impact, then you're not doing a service to me as a donor. And so it's like this whole system is set up to dehumanize the donor experience, the fundraiser experience, and to make us step away from what is essentially like should be a beautiful thing of empathy and impact.
So you were saying it should be this beautiful partnership.
Yeah, it should be this beautiful experience where I as a donor feel like I'm making a real impact in the world and you as a fundraiser have felt you're helping to connect someone to something that they really care about. And instead, it becomes this icky transactional relationship, which I'm not here to like give the thing. Actually, I was just thinking about this. So I was recently in Morocco, as I mentioned, and I went to Casablanca to visit Hassan II's mosque, which is, I guess, is one of the biggest mosques in the world, the biggest in Africa. Anyway, the point is, it's beautiful. It was built in the 60s, I believe. And the king of Morocco delegated out a team of people to basically knock on every single door in Morocco, up in the Atlas Mountains, the villages, the whole thing. I didn't get an actual number, but it's estimated that it cost about $800 million to build this mosque. Do you know how long it took them to raise that money?
Days.
40 days. It took 40 days. And the tour guide that we had, it was incredible. He was like, yeah, I remember I was a kid and the guy came to knock on my door. Oh, no, it was built in the 80s. So it was built in the guy came to knock on my door. He's like, I live in this little village high in the Atlas Mountains. And at the time, my father gave $30. I forgot what it was like, but we were a poor family, so $30 was a lot. And then they gave us a certificate from the king thanking us for art gift. And to this day, my mother still has this certificate and she won't let me bring it or show it to people because it's such a special thing. And I was like, that is what philanthropy, it's like they helped them to feel like they were building something bigger than themselves. And now this beautiful mosque in Casablanca stands as a symbol of pride for the people of Morocco, that millions of people a year come to visit. And what a wonderful thing that his mother still has this little certificate signed by the king, thanking her for her $30 donation. Anyway, I just thought it was a beautiful story.
It's funny because I've been having this conversation a lot, and it started with another guest on the podcast as well, but talking about instead of training our nonprofits to be better at asking for money, better salespeople, basically, training them to help people to see nonprofits as a conduit for them to make an impact on the world. What do you care about? Like, we have a cultural issue where people, because of the way it's been done so often, we feel like when that number pops up on your screen, you kind of have the same reaction as you would with a spammy sales call. And instead of how do we get people to see that the nonprofit sector, the for good sector, whatever you want to call it, the social impact sector is there to allow you to make that impact in the world. They're out there doing this amazing work and you can partner with them and be a part of that, be brought into that story. And that's exactly what happened there with the king. It's like, no, you can come and be a part of this and you get a certificate from the king showing you. And now they all feel ownership over this thing that's part of their culture, that's part of their city, and pride over it too. And I love that thought of how do we turn people in general, how do we turn people's perspective around and to see nonprofits not as another thing asking for our money in a salesy way, but an opportunity to actually go, I care about this thing and these people are doing something about it. I can be a part of that.
Well, Matt, you're singing from my songbook here, which is, I think we have just taken the human experience out of fundraising. And I think it's like these sales tactics. I was reading something about like, here, like the words that you use. It just feels like manipulation. And the point is, the foundation of philanthropy should be trust. I need to trust that the organization that I'm giving to is doing the thing that they said that they were going to do with my money. And when we employ sleazy sales tactics, when we're trying to like manipulate people, when we're using stories in ways to manipulate their emotions, that is not trust building. That is sleazy. It's manipulation. And I think as a sector, we really need to get back to the thing that we're really good at, which is building community, building trust, bringing people together. And if somebody says like, hey, Matt, this thing that you're doing, it's not for me. That's okay. There are many, many things in the world to give to. There are many causes that you could be a part of. And I think we, again, to go back to the dating analogy, we can't be so desperate. If someone says it's not for them, bless and release, and like go find people for whom you are for. What's interesting is what we've seen in the last couple of years is that giving has declined somewhat in the individual realm. Look, I think we saw an uptick in the pandemic because what we know is people do respond to crises. So I think A, it indicates that I don't know that we can really look at the pandemic as a baseline, but B, it also probably indicates that as a sector, we are not doing a great job at stewardship. Because if we really made people feel like they were part of something, if we really made them feel that we were aligned with their values and that we were giving them something of value to be a part of, you wouldn't stop giving. You would continue to give because it would feel good. And simultaneously, we have a group of folks, Gen Z and millennials, who are more socially conscious than I would argue any other generation prior. So they want to be part of something. They want purpose. They want to belong to something bigger than themselves. And so how are we as a sector helping them to do that? And I would argue that we're not, because to your point of these sleazy sales tactics, we're not building trust. We are treating them like transactions.
And I'm so happy that these types of conversations are happening. And I just was talking with some people last week about like ethical storytelling, and there's still a lot of questions of like, well, we haven't figured out all of it yet because there's fine lines there and all this stuff. And I'm like, that's okay. I think the fact that we're having the conversations, that we're trying to do better, that we're figuring it out is at least encouraging to me that we could be moving in the right direction to change the perception of all of this. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. One of the things that I've been advocating for recently is instead of saying invest in the life of a child or invest in the community or invest in the environment, really switching it to the character in your story is your organization. You guys are the ones out there saving the world. And we've been trained to say, it's not about us and we have to be humble. But it's like when people invest in Apple, they're not investing in iPhone users. They're investing in the people solving the problems. Yes, there's the problem out there. And I think that coupled with the term of nonprofit is like, you're not worth giving the money to. And then that leads to even more directed giving of, no, I want it to go to that kid or that project or that thing, instead of invest in us to go be the experts and solve this problem. And some people get it kind of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And other people are a little resistant to that idea. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
It's interesting. I actually don't agree with you. Because to use your Apple example, when I buy an Apple product, it's about me. It's about like, how is this going to enhance my experience? What does it say about me as a person that I have an Apple versus an Android? And so at the end of the day, I think people are pretty self-interested. We can have these lofty ideas, but at the end of the day, like I am the star of my own movie, just as you're the star of your own movie. And I think where I see it is the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell and the myth. If I'm the Luke Skywalker in my story, I need the Yoda to help me to be the hero that I tell myself that I am. So at the end of the day, when I lay my head down at night, I tell myself a story about, oh, I'm the kind of person that does, like, I'm the kind of person that invests in education. I'm the kind of person that cares about kids. Like, I'm the kind of person that saves dogs. Like, whatever the thing is, whatever story I tell myself. And if you as a fundraiser can help me further my story, can help me achieve the victory that I want to achieve. Well, I'm the kind of person that endows universities. I'm the kind of person that invests in whatever. Then that has created value for me as an individual in my individual story. It's funny, as I was traveling in Morocco, I reread The Alchemist, and everyone has their own personal legend. And I think as fundraisers, I really see my job as to help you to fulfill your personal legend. Like, who are you, Matt? What do you want in the world, and how can I help facilitate that for you?
Maybe I didn't explain it right, because I feel like we're saying the same thing in a way. Because I guess I'm looking at it more of, yes, you're going to buy the iPhone, but in this case, you're the client, you're the end recipient. So I'm looking at who's investing in Apple to go make those iPhones, to go do that research, to go figure out how to do that. So the donors are investing in an organization to go and help the kids or save the environment. But what we're doing right now is we're not giving them, the organizations, the ability to try new things, to experiment. It's all directed giving. It's all, here's my money, I want you to spend it this way. And they're telling them how to do their jobs. And it's also giving them this idea of that money shouldn't go to staffing, that money shouldn't go to compensation, that money shouldn't go to development or that type of thing. It needs to go to this thing.
I see what you're saying. So that the way that we're presenting it is restricting the gift.
Yeah, because I think it's setting it up. The organization is just doing this thing. Really, we're so focused on the end thing, which of course is important. We have to do that well, but the organization's the one, these guys are the one, we're asking them to solve the world's problems. They're out there and nobody wants to invest huge money in them. Well, because they can't get a financial return on it, for one thing. And I don't know if you've seen on Charitable, the documentary, but they kind of address a lot of that there as well. But also just the concept of, obviously it's a different type of investment, but I want to see nonprofits be freed up to go solve the world's biggest problems. And right now, I feel like because we're taking the attention, it's all about, don't make it about the organization. Like if I'm a nonprofit, don't make it about me because I got to be humble and it's about the kids or it's about the environment. Then people aren't wanting to invest in them and say, take this money and go solve that problem. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think it also depends on, it's really a budgeting issue. So when you're saying like invest in this kid, or in the case of like Charity Water, like invest in this well, I think it's about also baking in the cost of what it costs to do it, right? So your admin costs, your program costs, your overhead, et cetera. Because I think what you're saying is right. Like, I don't like restrictions on funding, but I also think as donors, you have to give me an idea of a fundable unit, because to give me money is not going to be as effective as your funds have created like 10 new drinking wells. That's something I can get my brain around.
Yeah. And just to kind of continue the Apple example, obviously because of investments and stuff, they can't say exactly this is what we're doing, but they give those updates and that this is what we're doing, or, we're pouring research in so people can make an educated choice of whether they're going to invest in that. Obviously, how we tell the story and showing that we can get the results is super important, and that casting a vision is always important. So, I was meeting with somebody yesterday and I'm like, he's talking about like, we do these retreats and we always have to rent the space. I'd love to own our own space where we could host these things. I'm like, that's an easy thing to get people behind. But what I would get people behind is you as an organization, you're doing these amazing things. You've done it with so little so far. If we have this thing, we can take that even further. Now you're giving them a tangible thing, but you're also putting it as, we are facilitating this. We have researched this. We are the experts in this. Let us go change people's lives and let them be a part of that story.
I think that that's right. It's really positioning the nonprofit as both an expert and a guide. Because as a donor, I want to know that you are the expert in the thing that I'm giving you money to do, right? I'm not an expert. Like, I've given money to lots of different things. I am not an expert in most of the things I give to. I'm not in environmental conservation. You better be an expert in that. So I think it goes back to the trust thing. When I think about trust, I think about 3 different types of trust. I think there's competency trust, which is like, are you good at the thing that you say that you're good at? I think there's community trust, which is, does somebody that I trust say that they trust you, which I don't want to speak for you, but I'm sure you've given to things without vetting them because a friend of yours or a family member of yours said like, hey, would you give to this thing? You're like, yes, because I love you and I trust you. And the third is caring trust. Do you care about me as a person? And I think all 3 types of trust are really important. And I think if you only rely on competency trust, which I think a lot of nonprofits do, and you forget about community trust and caring trust, you're making your job unnecessarily difficult. And so I think it's all of the things. It's creating a story that you allow people to step into and see themselves as part of.
It's interesting as you keep coming back to trust. I think that's obviously a huge thing. It was reminding me of back in my more organizational leadership consulting days. I don't know if you're familiar with Patrick Lencioni's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, right?
Oh my God, I love Patrick Lencioni.
And I just remember I went to see him speak before I ever read that book. And he was just like, look, if you're 80% of the way there on trust, don't go to the next thing. Keep working on trust. If you don't have that down, the others don't even matter. And I've always internalized that and applied that in leading teams. But it's the same thing with this, because you're inviting people to be a part of something. That trust has to be there. And I love how you broke that down into 3 different areas, because I think we tend to pick one that we know how to articulate well or that we know how to facilitate well. And then sometimes the other 2 get ignored or discarded.
Yeah, very much so. And I think when you look at the statistics, I can't remember exactly, but basically there's a statistic that is like, if you're only going to retain 20% of your first time donor, like the average is 20%, which is less than 20%, which is crazy, which means like 80% of the people who donated to you will not donate again. Why is that? And I would say it's probably because you have a crappy stewardship experience. You are not making people feel they matter. You're not making people feel important. And what's so interesting to me is, as leaders, we often spend so much time thinking about the people we serve. How can we create this amazing experience for them? How do we get trust, et cetera, et cetera? We don't spend nearly that amount of time thinking about that for our donors. And so I do this thought experiment with my people, which is like, what if all the donors that you had now were only donors you're ever going to have? What if you're never going to get new donors? What would you be doing differently today if that were true? Because the thing is, we keep pouring and pouring into the leaky bucket. But until we solve the leaky bucket problem, we're always going to be needing new donors, because we're cycling through versus making sure that we're retaining the ones that we have and then growing the pie. And so what I think, and I think this is the board issue, is that if we actually spent more time stewarding and retaining, we would have to spend way less time constantly looking for new prospects.
That's great. I mean, if people listening walk away with one thing, I feel like that's the nugget right there. Because we work with nonprofits all the time, and it's true. It's always just fill the leaky bucket and try to fill it faster so that you can keep it fuller while the leak is happening. But retaining the donors is a tough one, and is not one that I see a lot of strategy going into.
Yeah. Well, and what drives me nuts, Matt, and I'm sure this happens to you as well, is often I'll give, at the end of the year, I give lots of gifts, like small gifts to things that I've connected to or things my friends and family care about. I might get an email acknowledgement, and then the next year rolls around. I might give again because friends or family ask me, or it's something I'm personally involved with. But it's almost like a teenager who comes to you as an ATM, like, oh, I need money again. You're like, okay, but like, why should I give again? Like, what did you do with my money and how did you make me feel? And then when they don't give again on the nonprofit side, we're like, well, I can't believe they didn't give again. As opposed to asking the question, like, what did we do or what didn't we do to make them feel inspired to give again?
That's so good. Man, thank you so much for sharing. I mean, we could talk all day. I think there's a million different ways we could go here. And I'll probably ask you to come back sometime so that we can explore more of those because...
Oh, I would love to. This has been so fun.
Yeah, for sure. Let me ask you a few questions that we always ask kind of in the wrap up here. Who in the world of nonprofits and charity would you most want to take to lunch?
Well, I have to tell you, I think that Mackenzie Scott is up there as far as just because I think the way that she's been giving has been so interesting. I would love to know what her thought process is. I would love to know what she's trying to accomplish because it can be a little bit of a black box. I mean, I'm sure you know folks for whom a check just showed up and I was like, that's great.
And then I know other people who are like, I want a check to just show up. How do I do that?
Yeah, more people who are like, I want a check to show up. So yeah, I'd love to talk to Mackenzie Scott. Just like, tell me more about what you're doing and how you're thinking about this.
Have you seen the show Loot?
Maya Rudolph, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it was on my to watch. Is it worth seeing?
Oh, yeah. And the second season's even better than the first, but it's basically that story. She's married to a billionaire and they get divorced and she just decides, I'm going to give away all the money. I mean, it's very funny too, and Adam Scott's the sort of a douchey billionaire ex-husband who's trying to outdo her and whatever, but it's pretty funny. This isn't a normal question. I'll just ask you this because you started off saying a recovering executive director from a nonprofit. The thing that we see the most or see so often in the nonprofit sector is burnout. And based on you saying recovering, I'm assuming that was part of it. What's one tip you would give to somebody in there, whether executive director or not, but somebody in the nonprofit realm that's given it all and needs to avoid that burnout?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I cite a study by Harvard Business Review that looked at two different companies, Company A and Company B. They had the same amount of work, the same amount of pressure, but Company A versus Company B burned out. And what was the difference? The difference was the feeling of loneliness. And so the thing is, my folks out in the nonprofit world, you all know how to work hard. This is not whether or not you know how to work. You know how to hustle. You know how to grind. What I don't think we're very good at is asking for help and building community with each other, because I think the system so rewards like ED who's grinding late at night, burning the midnight oil, right? Let's let go of that narrative. It's not helpful. And instead, let's build community around solving really hard problems. And so I feel like back in my ED days, if I had been more mindful about building community with other people who I know were struggling with the same things, I probably would not have burnt out. The other thing is I just really want to caution people is to question the narratives and the things that we do that reinforce the stories that we tell that are not necessarily serving us, right? So I think we get a lot of mileage out of like, suffering is noble in the nonprofit world. Like, oh, I'm eating so hard if I work 90 hours a week. But is it a story that's serving you? And just to go back to brain science for a second, I realized after I was an ED is my cells were literally addicted to stress. Because what happened is that my peptides would pump through my body and I was constantly in this high anxiety stress state. And so much so that I got used to it. That just felt normal to me. And then when I stopped being an ED, it almost felt like, was I really alive? What was the state of like not being in constant panic? And I realized too that my constant panic was actually impacting my team and my staff in really unhealthy ways that I wasn't even aware of, because it's almost like explaining to a fish that water's wet. You're like, I don't even know what that means. I am operating in this high intensity, high anxiety mode, and I'm signaling to everybody around me, below me, and above me that this is how you operate. And I think, so to give myself credit too, I also think it's this patriarchal white supremacist culture that we've built up of like, as an ED, I have to know everything and I have to do everything and I have to sacrifice everything. So I don't know if it answered your question.
No, it's great. Obviously, there's no simple solution to anything and there's no simple cause for it. I mean, that's one of the hardest things I think today in the world is there's so many things that are wrong and that need to be fixed and that you have to feel like you're up on and know about and educated about and all that. And it's hard to keep up because every day you're getting barraged with this stuff. And it's not as siloed as people would like to think. It's not as categorized. Everything affects everything. And so you have to take a holistic look at, and how you're affected is different necessarily than how the next. So your personality interacts with those situations, and your situation and your background and everything you bring to it. Everybody's looking for the formula of what's the answer. I always give the example, threw out my back once and had a herniated disc, and I went to the orthopedic surgeon to get checked out or whatever. And I'm like, all right, when do we do surgery? And he's like, we're not doing surgery. He's like, you need to lose weight. You're putting too much pressure on that disc. It'll go away if you do that. And I'm like, oh, and my first thought is, okay, this guy's a surgeon. He knows the secret to how to easily, because we all assume there's a secret out there that celebrities know, or, this is before Ozempic, but that's like the easy way to get in shape or lose weight. And I go, so what do you suggest, And
he's like, go to the gym.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know, eat less, work out more. Like, what do you want from me? And I'm just like, damn it, you're right.
And actually, Matt, one thing that we didn't talk about that I think is really important is the role of trauma. So I've been doing a lot of research around trauma. And I think particularly for women and folks of color, like we have a lot of trauma. And I think there are a couple different kinds of trauma. There's acute trauma. So like a bad thing that happened. There's chronic trauma. So I think that's like just living in the US. And then there's empathic trauma. So I know a lot of us are dealing with populations that are living through hard things. And so when we take all of that different kinds of trauma in and we carry that in our bodies, in our hearts, and our minds, that can become very, very heavy. And so one of the things that I really recommend is, it sounds so cheesy. I'm from Northern California. I speak fluent woo-woo, but like really healing. And that looks like things like somatic coaching. It looks like yoga. It looks like body work. It looks like therapy. It looks like, if you're into it, psychedelics. I mean, it really is a matter of healing your body and spirit, because we live in a very traumatizing world. And for us to pretend it's not is, I think, why we're seeing all of these issues with mental illness of like, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Well, clearly we're not fine. We are not doing well.
No one's fine. It seems like at least half the country right now is, we're fine. Everything's fine. And I'm like, no one's fine. If we can all just go, it's okay to be not fine. Let's work through it together.
I know. And the thing is, like, we don't even have the vocabulary to talk about trauma and healing in a way that feels accessible to people. And it almost feels like shameful, like, oh, I need to talk about my trauma. It's like, look.
It's gotten a little better, but it's not.
Yeah. I mean, we're not fully there yet. And I think a lot of folks, and I've talked about this on my podcast, is a lot of people who get into nonprofit are coming from a place of their own wounding of, I'm doing this because I was so wounded by this particular issue. And so I'm going to give from a place of wounding, not from a place of love. And ultimately, when you're giving from a place of wounding, you're just pouring into an empty vessel versus coming from a healed and loving place where it feels the giving is energizing versus depleting.
I think to that point, there's a difference between being inspired by your experiences to give, maybe inspired is the wrong word, but motivated. And yet, if you have worked through that and found that healing and you're like, I want this for other people, but it's an area I know, so I want to focus on, that can be a great thing. But so often, and I see this in other fields too, and in therapy, in psychology, people going into it because I was treated badly, so I want to help other people, but they haven't worked through their own thing. And they're really actually so often going in to be therapists because I can focus on everybody else's problems and don't have to deal with my own and deal with my own trauma. But you can't really be good at doing that if you haven't done this. And I talk to people all the time where I just constantly talking with therapists and people in that field going like, there's no psychological screening to become a therapist. You just got to get the hours and pass the tests. There's no like, let's check to see, are you mentally sound? Do you need to work through your stuff before you're telling other people there? And it's scary, but that happens in so many fields and it presents as a good thing, as like, I'm trying to help people. Yeah, but you can't help people until you help yourself. You got to take care of you.
Dr. Gabor Mate had an interesting story. Are you familiar with his work?
No, I'm not.
He's fantastic. He's a Canadian trauma therapist. And he was leading a group of therapists down to, I believe it was Peru, to work with some shamans who are also healers. And the shamans were like, oh, this will be easy. You guys are healers. We're healers. Like, great. And they went down. And in fact, the shamans were like, whoa, you all have really dark energy, like so much more intense than we've ever seen. It was because in Gabor Mate in particular, they're like, you are the worst. Like, we actually can't have you work with anybody else. We need to work on you super intensively because as healers in the Western practice, they had not developed a practice of releasing the energy that they were receiving from other people. And so they were just taking it in, taking it in, taking it in. And these other traditions, healers have been taught to release the energy, so to speak. And so I think the same probably happens with a lot of our nonprofit people too, right? Like we just take in all of the trauma, we take in the pain, we take in the hurt, but we don't find a way to release it out of our bodies. And so is it any wonder we're burning out? We're literally eating other people's pain. In Chinese, there's a term called eating bitterness. I think as a sector, we eat the bitterness, we eat the pain, we eat the suffering, and then we take it into ourselves and then we suffer.
Yeah. And I've seen that with also people in the medical field, first responders, all that. And there's no training to release that and deal with that. You just stuff it in. I mean, I have friends who were first responders and worked in ERs in Brooklyn during the pandemic and saw the worst of things. And it just, I mean, the trauma of that is still so strong. And there's so little training and support for that. There's things available if they go looking for it, but nobody's looking out for them in that way. And we all can look at that and go, man, how can you not be traumatized by that experience? You hear those stories and you're like, holy crap. So yeah, we got on tangent there, but it's a good one. I think it's so true. I mean, it's just an area of our whole culture that is ignored so often. Last question, maybe the opposite of that, is what part of your job brings you the most joy?
You know, I have to tell you, Matt, I think conversations like this, because sometimes I feel a little bit self-conscious about letting the woo-woo out. But it's funny, someone said this to me. They're like, actually, the term woo-woo is colonialist. I was like, really? Say more. So I think the term woo-woo is related to things that are more spiritual in nature or intuitive in nature or more belief-oriented. And these kinds of things exist in cultures all over the world. And they exist very heavily in, not to be stereotypical about it, but women, like you've heard, like female intuition. And so when we say woo-woo in a dismissive way, I think we are dismissing that which is not necessarily measurable on a spreadsheet, but is still very real. So all to say that I've become much more open to my woo-woo nature. And I think the world has really responded. And I went on a spiritual retreat in Costa Rica back in August. And I came out of the spiritual closet, so to speak. And as a result, I think people have been much more open, willing, and excited to have these kinds of conversations that are not about like the metrics and the email sequence that you send out, but rather like questions of energy and spirit and soul and purpose and meaning and connection, which, yeah. So I've been thinking about my next book called The Spirituality of Fundraising. So I hope no one takes that.
I love that. I think it's so great. And it's so interesting because you mentioned female intuition. And I think that's a thing because in our culture, it's so much more acceptable for females to have those feelings than males. And I grew up very strongly having lots of intuition and all, but ended up very much repressing a lot of that, feeling like, well, that's not a real thing. And the mixture of, without getting too much into it, but like growing up in the church and then also just being a guy and all that stuff, it was like, that's not a thing. And it's been the last year or two really rediscovering that and going like, no, this is part of who we are. And there's more there. And there's so much that we don't understand and beyond. And when you close yourself off to those possibilities of how we're made to actually be and interact with the world and other people and everything, you miss the opportunities to reach your full potential and your full self and connect with people in really real ways. And it is interesting how I feel like the time for that, though, is now. Like people are starting to, not everyone, obviously, but I find myself in these types of conversations so often, and I never did before, which is great.
Yeah. Well, and I have to tell you, I think the way of the world, the state of the world right now is I'm hoping that the old ways of thinking are dying. I think when you think about a dying animal, the last gasp is always the most ferocious. And so I'm hoping that the old ways are dying, that we are finally coming to a new consciousness about the interconnectedness of all of us. And all of us like holding hands. I mean, like this old way isn't working for us. Like this old way is not good for my spirit and my soul and the well-being of others and the planet. So what does it mean for us to do things differently? And I think the old ways are seeing the threat. I mean, look at what's happening on college campuses right now. Like, why are people freaking out so much about it? It's because the young people are truly challenging the ways in which we've accepted as like, this is how it has to be. Does it? Is it?
Yeah. I don't want to get too into all that because, again, I think we could talk all day. And I think right now for me and probably for you, you find those like-minded people and you're just like, oh, yeah, let's talk more about this because it's hard to find.
Yeah. Let's talk about your chakras.
Right. Yeah. But thank you so much for being here, Rhea. This has been really great. I really, really appreciate it. And let people know how they can find you, find more information about you.
Yeah, for sure. So my website, which is rheawong.com, you can sign up for my newsletter. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can follow me there, but those are the two best places. Oh, and you can also listen to my podcast, Nonprofit Lowdown. So if any of this is resonating with you, my interview with JJ Mubarak about healing the wounded healer is definitely one to listen to.
Oh, I'm definitely going to check that out. I'm very excited.
Yeah, he's my spiritual therapist.
Yes. Thanks so much, Rhea.
Thank you. Good to see you, Matt.
You too. Creating Good with Matt Barnes is recorded at Rogue Collective in beautiful Newport Beach, California. It's hosted and executive produced by me, Matt Barnes, with an assist by my chaos coordinator, Tiffany Pope. Production is by our amazing friends over at Fame, the B2B podcast agency, along with Belinda Carter-Thompson and the team here at Rogue Creatives. Production lead is Mike Love at Fame. Writing is by Will Ainsley at Fame and Matt Barnes and Taylor Bolanos of Rogue Creatives. Miguel Mendoza of Fame is our audio editor, and Arslan Yacoub from Fame is our video editor. Creative direction and design is overseen by Corey Hill of Rogue Creatives. Our artwork is designed by the Rogue Creatives team and Rufino Mejia of Fame. Theme music is composed and performed by Jared Atherton of Chapters. Marcus Ponta and Mike Love of Fame do our booking and guest relations. Huge thanks to our amazing guests for joining us for this episode, and thank you to all of you incredible listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, and if you're still listening at this point, I'm assuming you did, don't forget to help us spread some good by giving us a good or great review. Preferably the, 5 stars kind with like really nice words, telling us how much you loved it, telling everybody else how much you loved it. Also, tell your friends and subscribe so we can come straight into your potholes each and every time we have a new episode. For more information about Creating Good or to join us at a live event in Orange County, California, visit our website at creatinggood.co. We'll catch you next time. This has been a Rogue Creatives production.